All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome. Welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark Live. My name is Jeff, also known as the Revit Kid. This is episode 67 of this live stream, which is pretty wild when you think about it. If you have never seen this show before and you're watching it for the first time, this is a weekly live stream where we talk about Revit and BIM and any really related software and technology. Usually with a focus on architecture, but we also go all over the place. I'm an architect myself, so obviously focus on architecture is where I like to be. But today I have a special guest, first time on the show. I'm super excited. And we're going to be talking about Dynamo, but not just talking about Dynamo, talking about practical uses of Dynamo. And he's going to have some awesome examples that I think you guys will find super valuable. So I look forward to that. You guys should too. Before I bring in our guests, I am going to roll our ad sponsor for this show, for this go around this season, and I'm super excited about it. For those of you who didn't see last week's stream, I will put a link to it afterwards, but I actually talked about this sponsor and what they do, and I showed some workflows. Before that though, let me roll the music so we can all have some fun with the music here. So Polycam, for those of you who have never heard of Polycam before, you definitely need to check out last week's episode, episode 66. I'll post a link to it in the description as well. Polycam is a application for your iPhone or your iPad that uses the LiDAR scanner as well as photos to develop 3D models. And those can be brought into Revit, as you saw in the little clip there, and as you saw from the hour-long demonstration I gave last week. So Polycam, thank you for supporting this show. If you guys are interested, head on over to polycam.bimafterdark.com or scan the little QR code that's behind my back right now, and you can install it right now. Install it for free, try it out, and see what you guys think of it. I look forward to seeing, after you watch this, or after you watch last week's thing, I do look forward to seeing what you guys come up with as far as workflows and so on and so forth. So Polycam, thanks for sponsoring the episode. And before I do bring on our guest, I did want to remind everyone that we are live tonight. It's 9 p.m. Eastern here in the United States. My guest, who is from down under, I think it's like 1 p.m. I think tomorrow, which is pretty wild. So feel free to chat. I will be keeping an eye on the chat as we go along. Ask questions, jump in, chime, heckle, do whatever you want to do. And we'll see where the conversation goes. So without further ado, I know I've made you wait a little bit there, Gavin, so I apologize. I did want to introduce Gavin Crump. How's it going, Gavin?
Yeah, doing really well. As I say, g'day, my usual intro, but yeah, great to be on the show. Like, I sort of can't believe I'm on the Revit Kid. It's like, I remember watching your videos like 10 years ago and being like, this guy knows what's going on in the industry. And it's so cool to be here. So thanks for having me on the show, and really excited to just talk all things Dynamo, BIM, whatever else we find ourselves talking about. And I did see someone ask quickly if I had a drink. So yep, I do. I know it's tradition. Yes, I got a glass of Nikia. It's a whiskey I like. So yeah, nice. I think Tony Howard was asking on Twitter. So
awesome.
Go, Tony.
Yes. So this show did start as a happy hour at the beginning of quarantine from the pandemic here, and it's kind of grown obviously and changed a little bit, but it started with grabbing a cocktail and talking about Revit. So yes, ideally, if the timing's right and you're into that, then definitely grab a drink.
I'm in Australia, so every time's a good time.
So awesome. And yeah, so thanks for the kind words. I appreciate it, but also congratulations to you on the channel, on the website and the blog, but also on the channel. You've got a YouTube channel, Aussie BIM Guru, and definitely some success there. Some awesome videos, usually around automation, Dynamo, right? And so
Typically automation. Occasionally I dive into Revit a little bit, but I mean, there's just so much coverage of Revit out there that I try not to tread on too many things that are being covered elsewhere by like yourself or Vulcan Architect or Revit Pure. I try to keep things fairly unique just to keep people interested. But yeah, it's built a really good little community. I mean, obviously not, quite the same size as what you've got going. I have mad respect for the communities you're building as well. But there's a lot of people that frequent all of our channels, I guess. I think it's about 23,000 subs, but good level of engagement and heaps of people reaching out via LinkedIn. So yeah, awesome to see people coming, and thanks for the support, everyone, as always. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. Oh,
I think you just went past 50K, right? Yeah, you just went past 50. Wow,
I don't remember if that happened after the live. No, I don't think it did. So yes, after a day after the live stream last week, we rolled over 50,000, which is pretty awesome.
Massive for a BIM channel.
For a little Revit channel here. So thank you guys for
nothing
subscribing.
but pretty big for us.
Yeah. If you guys haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because you will know when I go live and when I publish new videos. I've got a couple already in the queue ready to publish, not just the live stream. So keep an eye on that. I'm just reading this a couple. It's pretty funny. We've got someone here from India, so it's 7 a.m. there. Scott is from Brisbane, so he's got 12 midday. So I think he's a little different time zone than you, right? I think, or
yeah, I see someone saying I drink alcohol and I like snakes, so that sounds like they're from Australia.
Oh, that's awesome. The one thing I will say that I've been doing it pretty consistently at 9 p.m. Eastern for this go around, mostly because I have 2 little children now, and this is the only time that really works for me. But I have noticed a lot more of the audience from Australia and New Zealand, so I'm glad it works out for you guys over there. It doesn't work out very well for those in Europe, so I apologize to my friends over the pond there. I know you guys mostly catch the replays, but it is what it is. Time zones are tough.
If I ever meet anyone down under, I tell them to follow your channel, so hopefully I've helped a little bit there, maybe.
Awesome. Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. All right, so I'm going to keep an eye on the chat, and I guess before we jump in, maybe we talked a little bit about Aussie BIM Guru, but maybe just give everyone a little bit of a background on yourself, and since we're talking about Dynamo, maybe how you sort of got to where you are and why you aren't focused, but you definitely have quite a bit of an interest and a focus level on Dynamo.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll give you the long story short, I guess. I've been in the industry about 10 years now. Actually grew up in a town called Adelaide in South Australia, around the central south. Much less humid. It's very humid right now in Sydney. Listen to me ramble. but I moved to Sydney about 5 years into my career to pursue BIM management. Started out as an architect, but realized pretty quickly that I didn't really like keynoting too much. So I decided to be the guy setting the standard rather than following it. And decided that I was much more passionate about systems management and design. So I looked at families in Revit, and they just spoke to me like as someone that's very systematic in their approach. And I sat next to the BIM manager in my first job. I'm sure that had a huge impact on it, because I got to see what they do on a day-to-day basis.
And you got to hear them do nothing but complain about how bad everyone else was using Revit, right?
Exactly, pretty much, yeah. It was almost the opposite. Everyone complained about the BIM manager, because this was like a $2 billion hospital with like 80 architects on it. So the BIM manager's like enemy number one, because everything that goes wrong is not Revit's fault, it's their fault. But
of course,
I got to watch them defend it, which was a fun little thing. But and I also saw their one of their paychecks go across the photocopier by accident, so that was a good incentive to look into the BIM side as well. Hey, there's money here as well. So it was a good side of the industry to be aware of. Never touched it at university, really. Used AutoCAD and 3D Max. Did all my work twice, as we usually did. But yeah, from there I pursued management and eventually found myself leaning more towards consulting, helping more people. I launched my YouTube channel when I was at the last actual employer I worked for, and effectively just decided to use it as a training tool, initially sort of inward facing for the company, and then realized there was more potential for sort of promoting what we could do with the platforms. And at that point, I was really discovering Dynamo as well. I tried to learn it like 3 or 4 times and failed like the first few times. I usually recommend people are ready for failure when they try to learn programming, because it's not that easy. Like, you've got a lot of people out there saying, oh, it's easy, self-taught program, a piece of cake. No, it's not. Like, if you haven't got a computer science background, like, it is going to take a little bit of time to sort of shift your mindset a little bit into the way programmers approach problems. But you probably find like architects do have a lot of programmatic thinking naturally in how they work. So over time I've learned it, and then eventually it sort of clicked. I found a workflow that solved a problem I actually needed to solve, which is always my second tip for learning Dynamo. Like, find some context to your learning. I wanted to automatically number all the rooms in a project based on the importance of the rooms they were pointing into because the to from system like wasn't working. It was sometimes they're pointing into corridors, out of corridors, all sorts of variations on the rules. So instead, I found a way to identify how important rooms were based on how many doors they had and if they were a corridor, yada yada. But eventually, I just made the magic button, pressed it, and stood up and sort of fist pumped. So and then from there, like it's just been a learning journey. And eventually the channel came out of that. And yeah, I'm sort of now I'm consulting. So I've been running BIM Guru for about a year and almost a year and a half now. Consulting is great. You meet lots of people, lots of different company sizes. You get to sort of understand BIM in like a broader context. So you come to appreciate the process side of it, not just the technical management side that often firms are more focused on. Right. So I've been able to apply it to small scale builders, contractors, some engineers, some volume home builders. That they really can benefit from BIM. I found if they tackle it right. So some of my most successful clients actually aren't using BIM in the most exciting way. They're just using it in a highly practical way. Right. So it's been cool to introduce that. I've got my own content that I release over on my courses.bimguru.education platform, and just released my first course in Dynamo there. So I'm sort of slowly building up a more formal avenue of my career, whereas the channel's like my informal sort of day-to-day thing. And I know I haven't made a video for about a month there, so sorry everyone, I haven't died or anything. I'm still here, just focusing on a few different things at once. And next year I might potentially be going part-time with a fairly large firm in Australia. Can't really say who yet because it's all still under negotiation, but I've been sub-consulting for them since October and might be like a computational leader role, so that could be an interesting chapter of my career.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure you'll come up with some interesting ideas from that. So that's interesting. Yeah. So your first sort of problem, and I've said the same thing too, right? You want to find something that Dynamo will help you with, and that's sort of how you jump into it, is find a problem that you want to solve, and then it's an immediate success, and then you're happy and you want to use it. But it's interesting. So the problem you solved wasn't necessarily a BIM management problem. It was actually more of a document management problem. So it was more of an architecture problem, not necessarily the BIM man. Because I think there's two sides of it, right? There's the BIM managers out there who see all the automation side that can really help, but then there's also the architecture or design side where you use it to produce. So it's interesting to hear that even though you were technically a BIM management at the time, you found more of a document management type of problem to solve.
Totally. Yeah. Like, I mean, having come from a technical background, I think it really helped me as a BIM manager / computation manager to understand like what really takes the longest in workflows, because that's really what majorly for me, the point of Dynamo is to save time, to give us more time to focus on the things that aren't so easy to automate. So, going to coordination meetings, whilst you can try to run a clash detection and just assume it tells you everything you need to know, like you still have a lot of people in that equation. Whereas, tagging a drawing, I mean, imagine if we didn't have the tag all tool, it'd be a absolute nightmare to deal with Revit. So, but, Dynamo does a lot of similar things to the tag all tool, like, generate sheets from Excel, apply revisions to sheets. And some of the examples I'll show today really sort of reflect some of those, big ticket items that I usually use to sort of sell Dynamo as a concept to people at various levels of an organization, whether it's the tech all the way up to the business leader who can sort of see just, either money or time, or I'm going home at 5:30 today, that sort of thing. So, and Dynamo sometimes is how I get home at 5:30 if I'm working in an office. Like I take a task that could have taken a week and reduce it down to like an hour or 5 minutes or 1 minute, 2 seconds. It's pretty amazing.
Oh, yes. And I'm sure there's a lot of us who started using Dynamo that have the data of the 1 or 2 tasks where they had to sort of show people, this is the value. It took me 4 days to do this before. Now it takes me 1 click. It took me 2 hours of Dynamo and then 1 click, and now it's only going to take 1 click from now on.
Exactly. You can't go back to the old way. It's once like that's the way you do it almost. Like I haven't actually been to the revisions dialogue in a sheet for like about a year and a half now, probably, just because I know that I can automate that process. And there's a lot of great add-ins too out there. Like Dynamo is just one way of going about it. So I know you had an episode quite recently with Nick, who I can see is in the chat, Revit Pure, and he showed some really great add-ins that they're all using the same Revit API in the background, but add-ins can be a bit more direct and more easily deployed. But the Dynamo is a great way for someone just to get started, and you can deploy Dynamo fairly well if you know how. Like you can use batch, like to manage packages, you can use batch scripts, or you can move things around using power deployment tools or like platforms like Orchestra. But yeah, it does take a little bit more thinking and work to make Dynamo sort of work at at a business scale. But my largest client I use it with is 400 people, and I think about 350 of them are probably using Revit on a semi-regular basis. So yeah, you can make it work. Just takes a bit of work. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. So we are going to jump into some practical examples. But before we do, we are going to take a quick little break for the Big Bad BIM tip of the week. For those of you who aren't familiar with this little part of the episode, this is the Big Bad BIM tip of the week. So what is the Big Bad BIM tip of the week? Well, it is a weekly segment where you, the audience here, shoot me an email or message, however you guys want to send it, of your favorite Revit tip. And then if I pick it and share it here with you guys, I'll send you a free t-shirt. And this is sponsored by Enscape. Those of you who follow my channel, I just posted a video on Enscape's latest release 3.2, some really cool functions and features. Is a real-time rendering program for Revit. Definitely check it out. If you haven't, it should be part of everyone's workflow in Revit. And you can head on over to enscape.bimafterdark.com to save 10% off your subscription. So without further ado, this tip is from Sean. You submitted it like a few months ago, Sean, so hopefully you remember. I think I only have your first name, so hopefully you remember and you can email me. But it's an awesome, really, really fast, really quick tip that I think some of you guys will find super valuable. So this tip is actually super simple, but pretty valuable. So when you have elevation views and section views and you have them all set up and exactly where you want them to be, and you don't want them to move, well, you can just select them and pin them. And select this section and pin it. And now you can't move the view. And what's great is you can also do select pin objects down in the bottom right, which was a tip from a couple weeks ago, and you can make it so you can't even select those if you really wanted to. But pretty cool tip, super simple, but something that you may not always think of, which is just simply taking your elevations, sections, callouts, you name it, and pinning them in place so that you can't move them, but you can still use them. Awesome. So Sean, thank you for submitting that tip. Super simple, super quick, super easy tip, but could be super valuable for you. Gavin, I know you didn't get to see the tip, but it was pretty simple.
I was watching it on the second screen.
It was pretty simple. He was just talking about pinning views. So, you know, getting elevation and sections and callouts and then just pinning them. And as a BIM, former BIM manager, I think you can see the value in that. And it's one of those things that, you know, when you think of pinning objects, you don't think of pinning views. So Sean, thank you for submitting that. Pretty cool. And again, you guys head on over to enscape.bimafterdark.com and let them know that you heard about it, about them here, and they support the show. So that's the Big Bad BIM tip of the week. If you have a tip you want to share and you want me to share here live in the show, shoot me an email. And if I choose it, I'll send you a free t-shirt. So, all right. So pretty cool. So Gavin,
I was going to say, if I ever submit a tip, I'll have to be careful because, you know, hopefully in 2 months I'll be a bit lighter. I've got a bit of COVID weight to get rid of. So
yes. You'll have to let me know.
I saw a very important question in the chat too. Someone asked, does the toilet water swirl the other way in Australia? And it does. I've been to America and it does go the other way. I'm not quite sure why. It's probably something to do with the gravitational pull of the Earth and the magnetic. There's probably some science behind it.
I'm sure there's
someone just got bored. And,
yes.
Yeah, but also your toilet water in America is really high. I remember too. Like you really don't like splashback.
I didn't know that. So, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's a weird one. Yeah.
And then actually Joe Buchek, who's a member of my community, hey Joe. He had a good one. He says, does the waiting icon swirl in the opposite direction too?
Good question. I think we go clockwise, I think, if I remember right. I do stare at that thing probably about half of each day I work. So
I was going to say, yeah, I hope it does. Awesome. So Gavin's going to show some practical examples and walk through them, and hopefully it shines some light on how you guys can use Dynamo. And even if you haven't ever used Dynamo and you're thinking of getting into it, hopefully these practical examples will give you a reason to try. Because again, as we mentioned twice in the beginning, and I've mentioned numerous times in this channel, giving yourself a reason to use it is the best way to start. You know, find a problem to solve. So with all that, Gavin, let's jump into it. They're seeing your screen, and let's jump into the examples.
So probably, I mean, one of the first things people say when they start Dynamo is I don't have anything to use. So first thing I'm going to do is take away that excuse. On my GitHub, on the Dynamo, I've got all the things I'm using today under the Revit kit in my GitHub. Awesome. So no excuses. You've all got these things.
And I'll put links to all this stuff. Today,
Yeah,
Fantastic.
anything I do today, you can do too. So I guess I am using a couple of custom packages today. I'm just going to be using like these four here. So Crumple, which is one I build myself. Data shapes for user interfaces. I'm not using Monocle, but it's just like nice to have because it lets you check your packages you're using, all sorts of cool stuff, lots of memes. You know, John Pearson, most people probably know him, he's a fun guy. And also Orchid for some family work. So that's all you need today, package-wise. I'm in Revit 2020, but I guess less technical stuff, more fun stuff. So what I've got here is like these 5 Dynamo scripts, and they're in Dynamo Player right now. So if anyone hasn't seen Dynamo Player, this is a really great deployment tool. I do recommend like learning it early, learning how to package your scripts for other people, because this is a really like soft entry point to Dynamo. It sort of makes it a bit like using an add-in per se. So the first script I was going to look at is this revisions to sheets tool. So you might have all noticed straight away, this is like a pimped out version of the advanced sample project by Autodesk. I got a little bit tired of it not having elevators and just decided to rebuild the whole thing in my standards. So it's fully documented. It is paid for on my platform, but I do also have like the basic sample project for free, which again, remade, fully documented. So you get like some cool things like this. So like you get full wet area documentation, for example. So if you're looking for some good learning models, this is probably a good one. There's not too many out there, so at least for free. But yeah, this guy will set you back, I think, $200 dues in Australian dollars, that is. Anyway, so I've got, say, like a whole bunch of sheets in this model as well. And I've got some revisions in here too. So often when you're chucking revisions on sheets, let's say you want to send out 300 drawings tomorrow, it can be a really slow process if you're going to try and do it manually. Usually you have to go to sheet, scroll down, get this box, pick your revision, okay, next one, select it. And you don't have to open the sheet, but you have to click a lot of things. I think most people at the very least like use an add-in or something like that for this, I hope. If not, definitely go searching. There's heaps of good add-ins out here that can do that. A lot of them are free too. But I've built this script in Dynamo, and this one actually uses what's called data shapes, which allows you to trigger more intelligent user interfaces than what Dynamo Player gives you when you run it. So as soon as I smack play on this thing, and I'll go in the script after and show you what it looks like too, because it's not like the most beginner-friendly script, this one, but it shows like a good use case. So here's all my sheets in the model. I can pick them. If I wanted to, I could make like a tree list that sorts them by series as well, if I wanted to make it more sophisticated. But let's say I just, I'm sending out all my general arrangements, pick them all. Which revision do you want? Let's say we're sending it out for as constructed. You can either add or remove. And Dynamo then takes these inputs and sends them through to the script and runs the process. And I've also built a little message that tells the user what happened. And effectively, we just went and up revisioned these 4 sheets. But you could do that to 4 sheets, 2,000, 50,000, that doesn't really matter. The great thing about Dynamo and computation is it's typically scalable because we're working with things called lists, which are like containers of objects, and that's really any number of objects in there, and you're applying a process across them. So it's probably the one I use to like sort of sell Dynamo to like project leaders because they're constantly sending out drawings to consultants, and sometimes it can take a whole day just to send out drawings, and that's like it doesn't need to take a whole day, especially not the technical side. Maybe the Aconex upload, or maybe that's still a little bit slow. Having said that, you can automate that too to some degree in Aconex. But this is the script. So pretty much all of this is like the user interface. So that's actually the more complex part of a script like this. Having said that, you could package this in Dynamo Player without a user interface. If you haven't seen data shapes before and you have used Dynamo, I do recommend exploring it. But effectively, I'm sort of building up like input buttons. So this is like a list view of my sheets. And I'm effectively getting my sheets as elements in Dynamo, getting their name and their number so that I show the user the name and the number and I send the sheet through in the background. So it's a user-friendly user interface. But then we also do things like get all the revisions as a drop-down and also choose whether we're adding or removing as a true, false, yes, no, Boolean, as we call it in Dynamo. And then finally just showing a user interface. But the important part is that after you run it, you send out the inputs to Dynamo. So it runs a little bit like a Dynamo script at that point. So I do use like some custom nodes from my package. Having said that, there's lots of similar nodes to the ones I've built. I just build a lot of them because I enjoy, packaging them all in one place, and also just like sort of redocumenting a few of them, modifying a lot of them. And some of them are like my own unique creations as well. So, so for example, this is a custom node in Dynamo. It does use Python. So there is like a learning curve in Dynamo. You don't have to start here, obviously, and I don't recommend starting here, but like the rabbit hole goes pretty deep once you get into it. But you can do heaps without it as well. Like you don't need custom packages to do a lot of workflows. Like you can create floor plans just out of the box as Dynamo comes. So you could send through like a whole list of levels to create a floor plan for example, or a ceiling plan, so on and so forth. Then at the end, I'm doing some processing and sending out a message using a custom node. So it's a relatively complex script for a basic user, but once you know how Dynamo works, this is like a really good example of a script that almost behaves like a plugin. You almost wouldn't really know you're running Dynamo when you run a script like this. So it's usually like my favorite one to sort of show people. And I've got a couple of tutorials on the channel where I show how to build it. I think I've got one from something like 2 years ago where I do a pretty bad version, and then I've got one from about probably 2 months ago where I sort of do this sort of pimped out version of it. So it's pretty fun example. Yeah, what do you think of that one? Jeffrey, is pretty handy.
Yeah. I think it goes along the use of like or the example of a arduous task that everyone can can relate to, and how you move through it. And I know, for the sake of time, we're definitely not going to dig into each one, but for anyone who's not familiar with Dynamo, the way you've had it grouped and the steps, I mean, that is what it is. It ends up being, even though it looks very complicated when you zoom in and look at all the coding and all that stuff, the way you grouped it, I think, Gavin, is probably the most useful.
Yeah, I'll probably bring it back up just for reference so they can see. So you sort of break it down step by step. I mean, you're always going left to right in Dynamo, but really I'm just breaking them into sub processes or sub steps. So I put the UI into its own little stage, add and remove its own stage. So, and that comes with experience over time. You learn that the best way to learn from yourself and to show others is to make it understandable for other people. Often you come back to your own scripts and sometimes you don't understand what you were doing just because it might not be organized. So it's really valuable just for yourself to even have these things in a logical sense. And that sort of carries on to programming as well. Like when you put comments in your Python scripts, it all carries on. Sorry, you go.
No, that's fine. I was gonna say, and I will say that one of the best ways to learn this stuff is taking an example like that, and reading through those steps, and then whether it's doing the same thing and recreating it, or maybe modifying it a little to do something different. But looking at the script that which again I'll have links to all the downloads so you guys can dig through it. But looking at those blocks of nodes and seeing this relates to that, this node does that, and that's really the key here. So you guys will have access to it, and you can dig through those steps and sort of get an understanding of what was happening there. I also think you had the data shapes in the messaging output, which added a lot more to it, and so I want people to also realize that you can, if you didn't do all of that, there's much less nodes, and it might be a little less intimidating too. Just the heart of that script, right?
Really, I mean, the most basic script I think I usually start with is just one that I think Dana, the Philippi, did, where she takes the room's area and just divides it by the occupancy ratio and just puts that figure into the occupancy. So it's like get a value, do some maths, set the value. So sometimes you can do like really simple scripts that you just hit a button and you don't even have to think about it. Like it's often good for just doing what I call parameter jamming, where you take like some data and just jam it into some parameters. So it's good for really simple things too sometimes. But I guess the more complex the workflow, the more complex the script becomes. But I guess like that one there was like an example of a workflow where you're really just like processing data. You're not really doing anything that like someone can see in like the 3D model. So I find sometimes that's like a hard example for like maybe like a director to understand. But this one I usually use for like design directors. So this model actually has like a whole bunch of floor finishes already pre-modeled in it. And most of the time floor finishes are typically just like the whole extent of the room. You might have like a hospital or a job where you've got like an inlay vinyl or something more bespoke. But most of the time we're just sort of setting things based on room extent. So if I wanted to take, say, like these 3 wet areas, and let's say I didn't have a floor for them, I can use Dynamo to just generate a floor to the same outline as the room. So usually when I run this script, I tend to just turn on the rooms because it's easier to select them. They're quite hard to select otherwise. But what I'll do is just turn on the crosshairs for the rooms. I might just turn everything off except for rooms, and maybe I'll just leave rooms and floors on, I think. Still can't see them. I must have missed something. Oh, I didn't turn on these things. Cool. So now we should be able to see this. I'm probably just going to turn off all the annotation too. That's sort of getting in the way. And I might just hide a couple of rooms I'm going to pre-select. Now I do have like a more super version of the script that like effectively only lets you select rooms in Dynamo, but you need to use like a few more custom packages for it. So I just wanted to avoid it because it gets more complicated, keep things a little bit simple. So at this point, I'm going to use this like room to floor script. And this one uses Dynamo Player, so there's no data shapes involved. So it's a little bit more straightforward for a user to run. Usually I recommend leaving like your inputs empty when you build a script for Dynamo Player, because what it'll do is it'll force the user into the inputs mode rather than trying to run the script if there's something missing. Whereas a lot of scripts people build might have like predefined things that shouldn't be there, and then it tries to run if someone hits play. Because I've learned through managing people with Dynamo that everyone just wants to hit play. They just want to hit the trigger button without thinking about it. Because often they're not really trained in how to run Dynamo, and it's not their fault. It's just the nature of people in a rush trying to solve a problem, I guess. So often you have to design for people's behavior. So this one, you select the rooms that you want to apply finishes to. I think this one, it gives you every floor type in the model. So let's say I want to, in this case, build like the floor tiles 3x3. And this is like a either a set down or a set up finish. So if you had like a carpet, you're going to be laying that on the slab. Whereas if you have a tile floor, you're going to be setting it down. So I do have an option to like push the floor up after it's set as well, because floors are built top down. And this came through just experience, because often I found users weren't just using it for like tiles, they were using it for carpets and other things like that as well, especially in interior design. And afterwards they were having to go and actually push all those floors up by their thickness. You can also do it like taking a piece of data out of the room that relates to a finish in Revit itself if you want to do like just a fully automated workflow. But I found sometimes the user just is happier just selecting a finish and nominating it as they go, because you do rely on things like having like data like tile for floor finish in the room, which often people just don't do. So I think if I hit play, we should hopefully just see 3 floors pop up. Cool. And there we go, and we just made 3 floors, and this would have taken a little while to trace the border for. Sometimes you might have to come in and like, modify like the door threshold after and a couple of those little details. But it just saves, time. And I only did 3 floors there, but I've used this like the other day on a hotel that I was doing for a client, and I did like 11 stories of floor finishes in about probably, I think it was about 12 seconds it did them in. And this is like all the carpets, all the tiles, all the set downs were automated. So like I just pressed a button and just came back to them in like 5 minutes. And I probably should have just said it took 2 hours and charged 2 hours. But
you definitely should have waited.
Because that's a hard thing. You become sort of too efficient sometimes with Dynamo, and as a consultant, you have to find like even more work to do. But that's the good fun side of it. So this one's like a little bit easier to understand in Dynamo as well. So if I open up the inputs, you'll sort of see that it's a bit smaller. And it's a bit easier to understand in layout. So like you start with the selection of the rooms. And because I'm in Dynamo Player, I've actually like nominated this as an input for Dynamo Player. But really the key to this is just this node here. So if I'll just do a bit what we call freezing, which means we tell some parts of the script not to run, just so I don't go and like rerun the process. But if I select these rooms again, Dynamo does like have the ability to process geometry. So now I have the outlines of those rooms. I do have to do a bit of processing of the rooms, because sometimes you might have a floor with like multiple outlines in it. You might have some donut rooms, and because I'm running in 2020, Dynamo doesn't have the ability to generate floors with holes in them. 2022 we do, but until then, unfortunately, we have to usually just manually go and cut those out after. And I wish there was a way to put those floors back in, because I've had some projects where I would have loved to have sent those 2022 floors back to 2020 with the automation I had available. I'm trying to convince a client the other day, can we just go there so I can do ceilings in Dynamo? So I did them all manually. It's good fun. But I guess in this case, I'm just trying to find the biggest outline of those lists, and eventually I just generate a floor by the outline, the floor type, and the level. So sometimes the workflows are a bit easier to understand. Now I am doing a lot of like what I call shortcuts here. I'm using what's called list levels in Dynamo, which is a very complex technique that a lot of people struggle to understand at first, even I did. So you will find your scripts might not look so clean and efficient when you start, but like that's okay. Because often these are great scripts to come back to when you've learned a bit more, and you can sort of refine your workflow. Like my door workflow was probably, I don't know, it was like something like 300 nodes when I built it the first time around, and the second time probably maybe 150, and the third time I used heaps of custom nodes, and it was something like 20 nodes. So you sort of use your own workflows to learn from in your own sense. But I've left a couple of inputs empty, so there's a few errors which we all see in Dynamo. Another great tip: read the warnings, read the errors, and try to troubleshoot, because programmers are like always having to learn to troubleshoot. You can't avoid it. It's like if you don't want to troubleshoot, programming's not for you. Because it's like so much of it's troubleshooting. I'd say probably like 60% of the time is just like yelling at your computer, wishing that it would work and do the thing you want it to do. But that's the fun too. So, But I guess while I'm on that, just it's worth noting that we have a forum. So we do have like a Dynamo forum that is super supportive. Like you can come here and ask like a pretty stupid question and people won't say you're stupid. Like it's a very supportive community. We want to improve people. We want to help them. And, you know, even if people are on the wrong path, like we try to set them on the right path with their thinking and their learning. So, you know, highly recommend that you check this out if you're using Dynamo, and especially if you're struggling as well.
Yeah, for sure. If you guys plan on learning Dynamo or in the process of it, definitely use Dynamo forum. There's a lot of helpful people there. And I will add, just going back to what you mentioned with lists. So you know, that's definitely more of a not necessarily a beginner Dynamo thing to start really diving into lists, but one of the tips that I suggest, and if you get to that point, is watch nodes are your biggest friends when it comes to lists. and see, you know, that's kind of how I figured out all those list levels, is just keeping watch nodes open and like flipping it and just like watching the data come in and out, and then you know, and then you start
just experimenting too, like changing this, or what happens if I do this, and you sort of learn through just like mucking around, and sometimes breaking your model. Like sometimes it won't be a good outcome, but you sort of learn, you know, okay, I guess I won't do that again. Like it sort of teaches you, because Dynamo is a little bit unforgiving if you like are experimenting with it. Like usually you don't want to work on a live model if you're training, obviously, but like sometimes you can just like crash Revit if you divide by 0 or something like that. So so it can be a pretty scary environment to learn in sometimes, but we all go through it too. So like just take rest assured that we're all sort of breaking our computers from time to time. So
exactly. So Bobby had a question about the Dynamo player. He asked, or she, sorry, it could be he or she. Do you know a way to define the default folder for Dynamo player?
I don't think it's in the initialization file, which I think is there is like a Dynamo settings file, but I don't seem to recall that it contains that. So there is this like Dynamo settings file, which is in an XML format. I'm probably just going to go full geek here, so sorry if people don't quite understand, but somewhere in here there might be like a preset for it, possibly. Occasionally, like in some companies, I might like overwrite a couple of these things using Dynamo. Like I can use Dynamo to set a settings file. I used to have like a run me script for new users at a company, and it's like before you use Dynamo, just run the script once and it goes and rewrites your settings file and moves some custom packages around and sets some things up. But I don't think the Dynamo player's default is in here. And every time you change your Dynamo player folder anyway, like Dynamo remembers it for the next time, so it becomes something that your session just like remembers, which is good and bad, because sometimes you might want different folders for different projects, for example, so it can be a bit of a drag. I mean, I do just recommend usually just going with the Windows hack of copying a path and just pasting it and okaying it there, and that takes you straight to that path, rather than trying to click through this really tiny interface that's, you know, super hard to navigate. That's probably like the best tip I know there. I think I saw this come up on Dynamo forums about like a week ago, and they didn't have like a solution for it per se, if I remember right.
So if you're pointing to a custom location, you're just relying on Dynamo remembering that the next time it opens to a Dynamo player.
Yeah. So if I close down Revit, I'd have the same location here by default when I boot it up next time. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it doesn't remember it between like versions of Revit, but it remembers it in the specific version that you're in at the time.
Got it. Yeah. So
typically,
hopefully that's helpful. I'm not sure if the question was how to change it to a custom path, or how to change it so it always opens looking at a path. But either way, I think we kind of answered it to where. Yeah,
probably because the company has like a default script location. They just want users to be forced to open, so that they don't just have an empty script and go bother the BIM manager straight away. So yeah. Because the hard thing too is every time you like patch or update Revit to a new build, I think it might forget it as well, because it sort of like reinstalls to some degree Dynamo. So I think it sort of like loses that every time. So it's a good question. Very relevant. But yeah, I guess but yeah, we can probably jump to our next one if you want. So this is a good one. This one, like, there's heaps of apps out here that do this, but the reason I like this script is because it gives me the control to do it like how I want to do it. So this is to isolate warnings in a model based on their warning type, and you can also splash them with color. So there's like an add-in called Color Splasher that I think also deals with warnings. But this one's I've used data shapes in this one as well, just to pop up a little interface. And this lets me just really focus in on warnings. I've got a pretty big company I support, and one of the staff here, like she uses this script probably about like 30 times a day just to isolate things, because you just pick the warning in your model. Now I'm really good, I don't make many warnings, so I've only got 2 types of warnings in this model with, I think there's only 2 elements on them. You can choose to override the color or not. I'll just say no, but when I run the script, it just isolates the elements that relate to them. So it makes it really easy to just focus in on them, and you can always section box them and then just reset temporary height isolate, and you're good to review the warnings. And you can run that in like any type of view, floor plan, 3D, whatever your current view is, it sort of focuses in on. So like this is like when you sort of use Dynamo Player a bit more like a toolkit. So you might have a couple of scripts that work together in this manner. Like you might have one that resets temporary height isolates. You don't have to come down and smack the sunglasses every time you want to reset. So and I will show that probably with PyRevit a bit later too, where I do actually have like two tools that work together. And this one's like, it's a bit more custom in how it works. I use quite a lot of custom nodes to make this one work, but there's a great package by John Pearson called Bang that effectively does like what a lot of my nodes here do as well. I just build them in Python and he builds them in C# or Visual Studio. So they're a bit more efficient the way that he does them. and it's a cool package too. It has the exclamation mark block from Super Mario World as the icon for it. So I really love that. I'm a huge Nintendo fan. So I mean, this one's mostly just dealing with the warnings. So you get all the warnings, what's their message, and we sort them together into groups, and then we just deal with the message of the warning. I make it like shorter, feed it into a drop down so you can pick from the list which warning you're dealing with. But in the background, we're actually passing through other data. So we're passing through the elements in the background or the warnings. And then we're showing the interface, checking what we did, and we're getting the corresponding index or the position of that warning message in the list and getting all the warnings that it contained originally. So often in like Dynamo, it's not like just like left to right. Sometimes you sort of grab things from behind and pull data forward. So there's a lot of interesting ways you can sort of connect all the script, but typically you're going left to right, but you might be drawing back on things from previously in the workflow. And then from there, getting all the elements, making sure we've got a unique list so we get rid of any duplicates, because sometimes elements might be in more than one warning, and we just isolate them. And then from there, I'm also just optionally overriding them as well. But every time you see like a little like C, that's like my Crumple package logo. So there's quite a lot of them in the script. I think there's a few things you can do without custom nodes here. I just use custom nodes to be a little bit more direct and just save a bit of space. But I do try to minimize like how many packages I use. Like that's one tip I give people as well, especially when you're learning. Usually I recommend just picking like 1 or 2 packages and just learning about those. A really good one I like is called Genius Loci. It has heaps of nodes in it. It's by a guy, I think in France, called Albin. And also the Rhythm package by John Pearson. They together, they cover like heaps of ground. I could be biased and say use Crumple, but like, to be honest, those ones are pretty good and I learned from them. So I don't want to, just toot my own horn. I'd rather teach people how I learned. And then this was sort of the outcome of my learning instead. So it's a bit more of a complex script, but behind the scenes, you're sort of starting to see a common pattern of user interface related things, process related things, and message is really the logic of how I build most of my scripts, and grouping comments here and there just to guide people on how it's working, and always giving like a description of each thing. I like the color code as well. Like pink is messages, green is actions, blue is like setting things or modifying the model, and then greenish, I think it's green. I'm colorblind, so I'm probably using colors I don't even know the names of.
They're all different colors though, so it looks, we get it. It's uniform, so it doesn't matter what color it actually is.
Exactly. So that's a really fun one, and probably like near the end I'll show like an alternative way that I built that same tool, like using PyRevit, which is another great tool that I recommend moving on to eventually. So probably like another one I like to show people, and this is the one that like shot my channel to stardom or whatever you call it. No, this is my most popular video. For some reason the bad version of it is the popular one and the good version isn't. So it still works, algorithm. But I use exactly whatever works. I haven't figured out the algorithm. So if I have like a family and I've made a new family file, I'll just use my own typical template. The first thing you'll usually need to do is add like all your typical parameters to that family, unless you've built a template. So this is like a template, for example, that comes with like a lot of my data already, but let's say you're processing like a family from another source, like a manufacturer. You're not going to want to go and add those 7 or 8 parameters manually each time. You're better off automating that process. So there's a really cool package called Orchid by, I think it's this guy called Eric, I think he's called, and I think he's, I forget country, it might be Denmark. Sorry, Eric, if I'm wrong, if you're watching, but I think it's somewhere around that region. So he manages his own package through GitHub. But this one I call the Parameter Jammer. So it effectively takes a preset list of parameters and just shoots them into the family. And I've also built another version that works across libraries of families as well. So you can do it like in bulk as well. But the Orchid package is pretty much how this works. And I like to use this one just to reinforce that often in Dynamo, you're going to be using things other people have built. Like you're not just doing it on your own. There's heaps of really cool people that develop like super useful tools that like do things that we all do on a day-to-day basis. So it's a really fun community to be a part of. You're sort of like standing on the shoulder of heaps of giants that have already done heaps of work before you when you join Dynamo. So it's not like coming to a company with an old BIM manager's work sitting there just untouched. It's like it's very much a collaborative community that keeps pushing forward. So I do use Excel in the background for this one, so I think it should work. There is like a bug in Dynamo lately where Excel doesn't actually work very well. So I think I've updated my Windows though, which is the problem that people face.
I was just gonna say it's not. I don't think that's a Dynamo bug. I think it's a Windows bug.
Yeah, I think one of the updates did like something with the X32, X64 versions, and Dynamo couldn't talk to Excel. I'm dealing with a massive company at the moment where half the users can't use Excel and Dynamo at the moment. It's pretty scary, but we're getting through it. So in this case, I've sort of told the script which parameters and which groups they belong to, what their parameter types are. So there's a little bit of work in the background, but eventually my goal is to make it like hitting a button. So I think I've got my shared parameters file connected, just a bit of a beast. That's just one group in it. But so in this case, I don't actually really need to do anything. These are like presets. So if I hit the button in the background, these would just be used in the background, but I can change them if I have like another Excel file to path to. But I think in this case, I might just make doubly sure I am pointing to it because I did move some files before this. Just to be sure, I think I've put them here, just to be sure. So if I run this, it should just go and take those parameters from the shared parameter file and create them with all those properties. I've sort of dictated them. No errors, great. So I have something in there that just checks if there's any bad data in the outcome. And there we go. So I've jammed in like all the parameters I need. And that saves me heaps of time. I also have a script I use that like puts the dates and all these values in my authoring data. So that's like my 1-2 sort of combo script where I just go 1-2, and that's the script that the family sort of preset. You can also do things like detect the category of the family and make like an IFC class table if you want to put IFC properties in there as well. So with these, you can save just so many clicks. Like I would have done this process so many times as a BIM manager when building a library. So this is like one of the first things I wanted to solve in Dynamo. So I like that one just because it's a very like outside the box sort of use for Dynamo. Right. That it's not just all about documentation. Sometimes you're processing the family environment too. Yeah.
And the same could apply in the project environment too, right? I mean, that's some people may spend a lot of time adding project parameters or something like that. So I definitely think it's useful. So let's maybe can we quickly jump into that script so people can sort of get a sense of?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So that one's it looks very simple, but like it's mostly using custom things. So like the custom things are what do most of the magic. It's really just deconstructing an Excel file is most of what this script is actually doing. So I'm taking an Excel file, converting it to a file object, and then just referencing one of the sheets, just reading them as they come in Excel. I'm not showing Excel, so we don't see it like in the background.
Right.
What I'm doing here is I'm using what's called design script, which is sort of like a second step in Dynamo. Once you're more comfortable with nodes, you sort of start transitioning to a written language in Dynamo. I find this is like the middle ground between Dynamo and Python. So you start using syntaxes that might look a little bit more complicated, but are really doing the same thing as like visual nodes. Like this thing here effectively is just the same as taking like the first item from a list. But in this case, I'm just turning this into a variable, which I've converted here. So initially I take in that object called data, which creates a variable, do a few things to it, redefine it as a transposed set of data. Again, I'm probably talking full geek here. But what I'm doing here is just saying take the first item, which in programming is 0, which throws so many people off. The first object in programming is 0, but it makes more sense the more you think about it. Like we were 0 once upon a time in age, so it sort of makes sense over time. But really I'm just bypassing this. And what I get to do is do this all in one big block of code instead of having to put heaps of nodes together. And over time, this sort of leads you towards line-based coding, which is definitely more efficient, but takes longer to learn. Because, if you get one typo, like it's not going to tell you where that typo is usually. You've got to sort of have a bit more understanding of how it all goes together. This is the custom node from Orchid, and that's pretty much doing the whole thing. I've just deconstructed my Excel data, and then I'm just feeding it into the node, all the properties, and pointing to the current document. And then I'm just checking if there's any what we call nulls in there, which are like bad pieces of data. If something fails in programming, you'll usually generate like a null or a none object. I think we call them null in Python as well, although we refer to them as none. And in this case, I'm just saying if any exist, and if there's more than 0, then there's an error. Otherwise, there's no errors, and that's pretty much it. So, but most of the hard work is actually in this thing, which has been built in a what we call a zero-touch node, which means it's been compiled into a dynamic link library or a DLL file in the package. So you can't technically like modify it or view it, but at the same time, it's often more direct and quicker because it goes straight to the references that Revit draws upon for its own commands in its API or application program interface, as we call it. So lots of crazy words there, I know.
There's nothing better than finding a custom node that does almost exactly what you want to do when you only have to add a few boards. So cheers to all of the package creators out there, because you guys they definitely make our lives a lot easier.
Yeah, because Dynamo can do like some things on its own, but there's definitely like a need for like a few custom nodes here and there in most major workflows. And sometimes they're pivotal to like making something work. Like I think there's a package that deals with like Slack, for example, and you can send like Slack messages to people through Dynamo. So you can put it at the end of your script and Dynamo like actually sends you a message when it's done. It says like, hey man, script's finished, and you can come back to your desk after like half an hour, which is pretty fun. And I've got one that sends an email, but there's a package called Mail Manager or something, not Postman, that sends emails as well. So there's some really, really interesting and abstract uses for Dynamo. There's even like one that does text to speech as well and can talk. So like it's pretty cool. So
that is pretty cool.
Occasionally I build those into scripts and scare people. So Dynamo like talks to you when it's finished and says like, hey, like back to work or something like that. Awesome. So it's pretty fun. Yeah. People are pretty creative in the programming community. Yeah.
So you mentioned PyRevit a little bit. I think it's probably time maybe to quickly just show, because we have talked about PyRevit quite a bit on the channel, and I think it'd be interesting to sort of make the connection for folks between, you know, what happens on PyRevit, what you did in Dynamo, and how those two can kind of relate for maybe people who are looking for that next step of what they're doing.
The reason why I really wanted to show it too is because most of the time when people look at PyRevit, they focus on this, like all the awesome tools that come with it, but like it's like this is like the tip of the iceberg if you're a programmer. So I've used Dynamo for about 3 years and finally, you know, decided to dive into PyRevit. I knew it was like awesome for a very long time. I'd seen people present on it, but just hadn't had time to really look into it. But what it does is it uses what's called a Python wrapper in Revit, and it communicates like directly to Revit rather than using Dynamo, which sort of sits on top of Revit. And then if you use Python in Dynamo, Python sits on top of Dynamo, so you're sort of like getting further and further away, slower and slower. There's less direct ways to communicate. So PyRevit just uses Python on its own for a lot of its tools. I think every tool here just uses Python. I don't think there's any Dynamo involved. Having said that, you can run Dynamo scripts through PyRevit. So like what I've done here in PyRevit is I've added an extension. So under settings, you can actually add your own custom sets of toolbars. So like this thing here, for example, is a toolbar you can access and open up all the Python scripts and look at them. It's as good as open source as it gets, really. But what I've done here is added this like the Revit Kit demo folder, which I'm looking at here. So it's really easy to build toolbars as well. You don't have to like use C# and Visual Studio, which to be fair is a great like way of doing it, but it's very complicated. I find most people struggle at that bit, including me. I'll be honest, I'm not really that good in Visual Studio, so I struggle. So like whilst I say I'm a guru, like we all have our ceilings that we reach from time to time. So don't worry, I try to keep myself humble. So in this case, I guess I've added this extension, reloaded PyRevit, and this has given me this like TRK demo or the Revit Kit demo. And that's essentially this folder. So I have my extension, and this is just based on how I'm naming my folders. So I have my tab, which is this tab here. And then I have my panels. So I have a Dynamo panel and a PyRevit panel. And all that's in here is what's called push buttons. So I've given them a name and the push button thing. I'm using what's called YAML files, but they're effectively what we call bundles in PyRevit. And they just sort of lay out the toolbar more easily. So you just use this syntax and it just tells everything which order to be in, what name to have. And then inside these folders effectively are just Dynamo scripts. And then I also just have a couple of things like an icon. So this is the icon. I think I called it that. And then as well as this, we just have, I think I've named these wrong. I think that's meant to be script and that's meant to be icon. So I think I must have loaded this from somewhere else. But in this case, this one should be called icon. This one should be called script. But what I'm seeing here is like a Dynamo script. So as soon as I run this, PyRevit opens Dynamo in the background so you don't see it. It runs it in, I don't think it's like a headless run. I think it's just running without showing you it. So it's running in background. And I'm effectively running my Dynamo script at this point. So like you can make Dynamo super friendly and packaged almost like an add-in without people even thinking about Dynamo at all. And that can be like a really nice little shortcut. And it was quite quick. It didn't really take any longer than running Dynamo normally. So you might have like an entire company toolbar just like this. But what I've also done is I've built one tool just purely in Python. So I'll show you really quickly what it looks like. So under the PyRevit panel, I have what's called a pull down. So this means that it actually has more than one tool locked in it. So there's actually like heaps of types of icons that the developer of PyRevit's allowed. So I'm called a sun. And there's other ones you can do stacks with multiple things sitting on top of each other, and I think there's quite a few more as well. So it's pretty funky what he's set up. He's definitely like a very strong programmer. But I have what's called like an isolate and a reset tool. So isolate, if I open it in Notepad++, which I highly recommend programmers do use. Don't use Notepad because you can almost barely read code. And I like Notepad++ because you can pick your language that you're looking at, and it highlights keywords for you. So if I open the Python script, immediately, obviously, we're dealing with written programming, so it's harder. But a lot of what I'm writing here is like super similar to how you would write Python in Dynamo. We're communicating with the same libraries, the same references. Having said that, there are some shortcuts that Asan's built in for us into PyRevit that sometimes, let us pop up forms and things like that because we don't have access to all those custom packages anymore. And that's probably like the scariest part of going into like these sorts of tools. You've suddenly lost all those tools. So Asan's really great in that he's sort of built heaps of like presets that you can still use. So I think somewhere in here I've got like an interface that I call on at some point. I think it's probably this one. I'm using like a form. And he's got a lot of great documentation on Notion, which sort of guides you through some of the syntaxes that you can use. But I just learned usually by looking at like all the Python in his tools and sort of seeing how he did things. So what you can do is run one of his tools, and then you can get the Python out and just say, oh, I see how he's doing X, Y, Z, which is really great. He does take heaps of shortcuts, which makes it a bit hard. So sometimes he uses like really great like tools that he's written elsewhere. So you have to sort of go to where that thing that he's calling on is located to find out what it's actually like doing in Revit. But like it's pretty awesome what he's set up. So this one, that effectively shows me a dialogue that I'll show you in a sec. And this one's like a lot simpler to understand. So this one is just taking Revit, it's taking the active view and it's disabling the temporary view mode. So sometimes they can be really simple little tools. So rather than going and clicking twice, I'm still clicking twice, but I'm clicking right next to the tool that I'm using. So sometimes it's just tiny little things like that. So I sort of build them into a combo. And what I can do is I can just click on the isolate tool. It's going to go and read all the warnings, and it's going to give me this dialog. So this is sort of built by the developer of PyRevit, the system. But it's the same thing again. I'm just looking at like which warning I want. Isolate 2 warnings, and I don't have to put that message there. It sort of gets in the way, but I just chose to. And we've just done the same thing in PyRevit. And it's a lot easier to deploy because you don't have custom packages that you're relying on. You just have PyRevit. So as long as you have PyRevit and it's up to date, that's the key. It runs a lot more effectively between different versions of Revit, I found as well. So there's much more consistency because Python is Python. It doesn't change too much between, well, I think he's using the same version in all of them. And then I've got like access to just little utilities like this. Like sometimes I use that little tool when I'm not even using warnings, just because I'm like, I can't be bothered going all the way down here and going through the shortcuts. So like PyRevit's pretty sweet.
Yeah, no,
and
that's awesome. So I think just to quickly reiterate what you were showing there. So you basically made a panel, and one is running Dynamo scripts, the other one's running PyRevit, so you can make a whole bunch of custom Python or Dynamo scripts. So one question I had when I was watching you click the Dynamo ones is, you would have to, I'm assuming, and maybe I'm wrong, but if you had inputs that weren't built using like data shapes, you would have to do something like that, right? If you wanted to build this method.
Yeah, you're pretty much forced to use data shapes at that point. There's another tool, Orchestra, which is more dedicated towards Dynamo, but I think they also support Grasshopper, and you're effectively forced into using data shapes just through lack of tunable inputs. I'm pretty sure Orchestra did add a tool that lets you hit those Dynamo player inputs though quite recently, but with PyRevit, you're pretty much treating them like a trigger to run a tool elsewhere, I guess, at that point. So it does mean you have to build your scripts a little bit differently in a lot of cases. But I do find that for the really advanced tools, often you're going to use data shapes anyway, and it's pretty rare that you'll mix and match data shapes and inputs in Dynamo, because that can be like super confusing for users if they run it and the interface pops up, they haven't got enough inputs, and it gets really messy. So I find I only use both if I'm like sort of running my own scripts that I design, because occasionally there's benefits to Dynamo Player, because what Dynamo Player does, which data shapes doesn't, is it holds onto inputs. So as I run, say this script, if I ran it once, like, and I change this to like standard 1, it's going to remember that the next time I run it as well. But data shapes always goes back to like default inputs. So if you're doing a task like many times, like the rooms to floor, usually in that case, you'd you'd probably like use Dynamo Player because it's easier. So like PyRevit might not be as good for something like that. You might want to build a tool in Python instead, which works a bit more intuitively. Or maybe you're going to rely on the data in your model more and less on the data the users input into Dynamo manually. Right. So it's just all about systems design, but that's why I love it. You know, you get to design these tools. It's like building families all over again, really.
And I think, I mean, the reason I bring it up is I think one of the biggest, the steps for people with Dynamo is the deployment part of it. And I think what you're showing us there is that, there are options, right? I mean, you can use the Dynamo player. If you use PyRevit, you can build it that way, and maybe even it may be easier depending on what your scripts are and how you want to deploy them. And then, of course, the last step maybe is you just build them completely as their own add-in and
add-ins. Add-ins are definitely like a commitment. Like there's not as many people out there that can build them, and you can engage like external consultants, or you can try to hire someone in-house. But there is a lot of challenges with that, I find, because it's harder for someone to just pick up and run with like someone's application. There's a lot of like layers to application development that are quite unique to each person that builds them. I find Dynamo, I can usually visually deconstruct what people have been trying to do a bit more easily. So it just comes with the size of the company, the culture of the company, and add-ins are definitely like the way to go if you want to like create like a pretty long-lasting set of tools. But just be ready to support those staff so that they don't quit, I guess, and also that they're gonna, every time a new version of Windows comes out, like set aside a week just to test everything all over again. Just like any time a new version of Dynamo comes out, test everything again. So
it's I think it's great to have to just show that there's other options for deployment. It's not just Dynamo Player, it's not just add-ins, and it's not just PyRevit. So there's definitely some different avenues to take.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I guess I want to reinforce just before we finish too that like I guess like what I've shown you is a lot of different ways of doing something, but what matters is really that the way that you think. Like that's what I found I've come to learn, regardless whether you're using Grasshopper, Dynamo, it's more about thinking like a programmer, and that often returns a lot of value to the way that you just work in general. So you can enable like data-driven workflows, you can open up opportunities for automation, and often you need to sort of understand the base concepts of how those things work to even like make those opportunities possible. So I do encourage any project leaders, managers out there that don't want to learn to be a programmer to maybe just start talking to them and just sort of start seeing those opportunities, because you can save like so much money with this stuff as a company. The bigger your company, the more money you save. It's so hard not to do it.
You most certainly can. And I will tell you from my experience, having attempted to learn like C#, for example, before Dynamo even existed, and then learning Dynamo, and then going back and looking at things like Python and C#, I think learning these learning Dynamo and how it makes you think, like you said, a little differently about how coding and this programming piece of it works. And it actually, when I dove back into some of the coding languages, I think it actually helped me a lot, because you start understanding the logic of thinking of
totally. Like I mean, like hats off
much
to
more user friendly.
Like hats off to Ian Keogh. He's probably not watching. He's super busy with Hyper these days. But if he ever sees this, like hats off to Ian, because he like introduced so many people in our industry to programming as an approachable concept. And like it's only going to get easier as time goes on. I think like the ceiling is going to get higher, but the entry point is going to get lower. So like it's easier to approach it. And like Ian's really created like a movement with what he did, which is what his goal was in every talk I've seen him talk about it. He wanted to connect the industry more closely to each other between companies, and he's totally done that. Definitely check out Hyper if anyone's watching, if they haven't seen it before, because that's like what his next like brainchild is with Anthony Huack, who's ex Autodesk. Definitely doing some cool stuff over there. So yeah,
for sure. One last question that Tom had. Maybe we can wrap up with this last question. He asked, what packages do you use? Not just the ones you're showing us tonight. So maybe what are your baseline custom packages? And I think the point that you were trying to make is don't just install them all because someone says to, right? And that's where I try to tell people when they ask me the same question. It's like, I have probably the 4 or 5 that I always make sure I have installed, but at the same time, it can be actually, a negative thing to have too many packages, especially if there's a bunch that you're not using. So I guess
some will just like break your computer. They're that old or they're that broken. Like some will stop other packages working, and they'll try to uninstall other packages because they're using older versions. There's so many I recommend not using. This is like probably my set, actually, not miscellaneous. I was just experimenting with that one. Cool package, didn't use it. So in this case, not that one, because that's for client. So in this case, this is pretty much my recommended packages, in addition to the ones that I showed today.
Awesome.
I'm finding I use Archilab a little bit less these days,
Oh,
and
really?
it's a silly reason, but there's this tool in there called like the automatic relay tool, and if you double click a wire, it like creates a little relay in the middle, and if you delete it and you click off, it like crashes Dynamo, and it's so easy to make these things. If that wasn't in there, I'd use Archilab more, but like Bimorph nodes is great for working with linked files and doing also some intersections really quickly. There are some very efficient things in there. So thanks to Tom, I think he makes that one. Clockwork is like one of the legacy like go-to packages, heaps of good stuff in there, mostly written in Python, although written in very efficient Python. So it can be hard to learn from if you don't know a little bit of Python already. Heaps of utility in there, use it all the time. Genius Loci, heaps of interoperability focused nodes, all in Python, so you can read it all. It's well written, fairly easy to follow, and the package manager is super dedicated. That's Albin from France. MEP Over is pretty much like the MEP package for Dynamo. Contains heaps of great utility nodes. I forget who makes it. I'm sorry. I did watch them the other day on a webinar. If anyone knows, feel free to chuck it in the chat. Rhythm, John Pearson, awesome guy. Probably like the fun guy of Dynamo, I'd say. He's definitely like got a wicked sense of humor. Yeah, definitely. He's like, you sort of relate to him like on a spiritual level because he's a video gamer as well. So loves his Nintendo. So, so he's pretty fun. But he's got heaps of good nodes in there, mostly written in C# for the most part. But he does share a lot of what he does quite openly on GitHub as well. And he also makes the Monocle extension, which makes Dynamo just easier to use and more fun to use. Sparrow I've just experimented with, but it's made by Bird Tools and Sean Fruin. It has a lot of great utility in there, so I do find I have quite a lot of use for that. It's sort of like a lot of the workflows are dedicated towards MEP as well, although not like directly connected to MEP, because Sean Fruin's like the MEP guru of Dynamo. And then Spring Nodes has like heaps of great utility in there. Even though I don't see it as updated as often, a lot of those nodes are really unique in what they do. I think this one has the node in there where it makes Dynamo talk to you, so I use that occasionally for fun. But I guess yeah, the ones I use today, my package, Data Shapes, Monocle, and Orchid for families. So that pretty much covers like everything. When I work with clients, I usually just build a package for them instead, just so they have like one package they can just deploy in-house by copying it around. And then you're in control of the source, but you do need like your guru on board to manage it. That's the hard part. So I do make sure there's a few people that know like what I'm doing. So so that, you know, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, it was bus proof, I guess is how I put it in programming. Like how bus proof is your workflow. Yeah, so I try to minimize it, but usually Data Shapes is an essential package. You just can't get by without it. And like you wouldn't want to copy those nodes into your own package because it's just disrespectful to the package manager. So we try not to like lift each other's work out directly. We might use bits and pieces and credit them, but for the most part, we try to let people know which package is the best sort of option for everything comes from. So yeah, that sort of covers my my recommended ones. But there's lots of other great ones.
Yeah, no, that's great. The like I said, I definitely. I mean, you guys feel free to install all the packages you just mentioned, but my suggestion is to find out what are in the packages and what nodes, and if you need them, then install them. But you have the list that you can look for the nodes, just because, like I said, you don't just want to go every single time install all those packages because someone said to, just because you never know what's in those packages. Actually, Matthias, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, asked if multiple packages or number of packages slows the search down. I actually don't know. Is that the case? It does.
Yeah, because it has to index the all the nodes available, and the search tool in Dynamo, like I hate to say it, but it's pretty abysmal. Like it just does not work well. Like we've always said it in the community, and we know that the people over at the team are trying. They've said that they've improved it in the next version, so we're all sort of waiting to see. But I think I have Monocle here, and I usually just use Simple Search these days, which just is like super quick, and it finds things so much better. So if I'm trying to like get a parameter value, if I go like get parameter, there it is. If I go get parameter, like where is it? It's not there.
Oh my god.
So like whereas if I go like element dot get parameter, like if I do it exactly as it's written, there it is, and it's not even the same name when you see it here. So it's like, you know, it's like it's so hard. The search tool it has to index all the nodes. Sometimes some of us use characters that slow down the indexing process, like me, sorry. My package uses this little like copyright symbol, which I know does slow down the index a little bit. John uses like a little rhythm symbol that I think he post applies when you load rhythm. But simple search is like the bee's knees, and you can turn off custom packages if you only want to see default nodes. So like Monocle is like just a must have for searching, I find. And I think you can dock it in later versions of Dynamo. You can actually put it in as a view extension that docks into Dynamo. So yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
recommend that one. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely install Monocle if you guys are using.
Yeah.
That's one of the
And you get
ones
like,
that's one of the ones you should install because it's not. I mean, it's a
yeah,
package,
you
but
get
it's not a
package
package.
installed.
It's
And I think if you're in later versions, it's a Christmas dog now as well. He makes them seasonal, so it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. No, that was a great question. So thanks.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
Matthew
great
in
question.
English. Okay, so Matthew,
Yeah.
I guess this is what his name. So no, that's great. I didn't realize it made it slower. Cool.
I gotta say too,
Awesome,
it's
man.
great to see so many familiar faces in the chat. Thanks for coming along, everyone. I can
For
see Red
sure.
Runner 92 or Christopher, and I can see Sean Page, heaps of Scordex. He comes to all of these, man.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it's
I don't
awesome.
actually know if you're a man or woman. I assume you're a man, but I'm not sure. But I hate to misgender, but yeah, lots of familiar faces, and yeah, really appreciate you all coming along.
Yep.
I was going to mention too. Do you mind if I mention the course too? That
Yeah,
I've
go
got
ahead,
just
man.
if that's okay.
You,
Yeah.
you have the final word. So as we're wrapping up,
Great.
let everyone know where they can find you,
Yep.
what they should check out, and I'm sure we'll have you back on to chat again
Yeah,
one
yeah,
day.
more
So
than happy to come back. It's been super fun. So I guess like I'm on YouTube, Aussie BIM Guru. Feel free to look me up. Haven't made a video for about a month now, just because I've been super busy. But I do try to do one or two videos a week. I think I went down to one for a while, and that felt about right. Usually super technical workflows. I share all my work over on GitHub, so my scripts are all there. So if you're really busy and you just don't have time to follow with me, that's fine. A lot of my users do that now. As well as this, I do have courses.bimguru.education. I initially used it to sell all of my BIM Guru Revit content, so I'm not really going to promote that because I think people come to that very intentionally. But effectively, I have a template and a system that you can buy into if you're so interested in that. But the main thing I wanted to show is I have a course for Dynamo, and I do have like some mini courses over on YouTube, but they're not very well structured. It's really hard to structure YouTube content in a series because usually the algorithm tries to take you all over the place. So this is like a 15 chapter course that covers pretty much right from the start through practical examples, a little bit of geometry, a little bit of data, custom packages, even data shapes. I'll show you how to build user interfaces. Finish up with a pretty thorough like coverage of how to learn Python just as Python, and then a quick introduction to the Revit API. It's $50 for 1 month access. I didn't want to make just a perpetual option only because I know that people only have so much money in certain areas of the world. But you can pay $200 if you want just forever. But I think the course is pretty doable in about a month. And it does contain like scripts you can download and things that you can work along with. And I'm currently adding subtitles to it. So I'm up to chapter 8, but we currently have 8 languages: English, simplified Chinese, French, German, Hindi, which I know a lot of my Indian viewers will love, Japanese, Portuguese, and Spanish. So yeah, just decided to package it. More courses coming in future. I've got a roadmap if you're curious as to what's coming and when it's likely to come. But we'll try to package a lot of my content and more here as well. So I do have a Dynamo for Model Managers course I'm working on right now, hopefully released in July next year, which will focus more on the Revit API and model management focused purposes for Dynamo. So yeah, feel free to check it out. Yeah, no pressure. You don't have to support me just because you follow my videos. That's fine. Like already just sharing my videos is great support because a lot of my clients find me through my channel. So like I get financed through it regardless of whether you pay directly or just tell someone about it. So there's no pressure. But if you're trying to learn Dynamo and you're finding it hard, this might be a more hands-on sort of way of doing it.
fantastic.
And there's also a student community as well. So I don't think I have the page for it, but there is like a chat group where you can ask questions. But yeah,
Awesome.
yeah, that's I guess my.
Great, and I'll make sure to put all the links that Gavin mentioned in the show notes on the blog as well as in the description here on YouTube once this replay goes live. Gavin, thanks again so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time. I hope everyone enjoyed the practical uses. I think it was pretty awesome. I found some value and some tips along the way. So thanks again for joining me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I mean, it's sort of meeting one of the, when they say like if you have 10 people at a table who you'd want to have dinner with if you could choose them, you're probably one of those 10 people. So
Awesome.
So it's cool to meet you at last, and just thanks to everything you've done as well and giving everyone this voice and community, especially during lockdown as well. That was a really great thing to have to sort of keep us all going and learn more. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing, and at the same time, I know you're probably going to take breaks here and there, so enjoy those too when you get them, because I know they don't come as often as we'd like, but
Well,
keep doing
thanks.
what you do.
I appreciate that, and hopefully one day soon we'll be able to actually have that dinner in person. So
Yeah,
I look forward to that day
um,
myself, to be completely honest.
yeah,
with you.
like an in-person AU or something like that.
Just anywhere, man. Just anything in person at this point in time. All right, man. Well, thank
Anywhere
you
but
so
our
much,
homes,
Gavin.
yeah.
I appreciate it.
Cool.
And thank you guys all for joining us. This has been fun. Again, as I mentioned before, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. Let's keep pumping it. Let's see if we can get I haven't set any goals yet, but I might set a goal next year to see if we can push 100,000 by the end of the year. I'd really love one of those YouTube plaques. That'd be so cool. But make sure you guys subscribe to the channel here. Thank you to Polycam for sponsoring this episode, as well as Enscape for sponsoring the tip of the week. You guys are amazing. Have an awesome weekend, and we'll talk to y'all soon.